right, listeners, thank you and welcome to another episode of Subscription Scaled. I'm your host, Nick Fredrick. With me today is Sinohe Terrero. He's the CFO of Envoy. Looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Nick.
Awesome. Before we dive into some deep subscription-related topics, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into subscriptions, and what you do at Envoy?
Yeah, so I'm mostly a startup guy. By now, I'm like a serial startup person. I've been at Envoy now for actually make a year this week.
Awesome.
So been here for a year. Before that, I was at another startup in San Francisco called Quid. I was there for 4.5 years, doing a lot of stuff. I was a CFO there and COO, so I ran sales and channel directly.
Okay.
Before that, I was at another startup in the city called Indiegogo, and in the city I mean San Francisco, which is so it's a crowd funding platform. So if you've heard of Kickstarter or GoFundMe, Indiegogo was one of those players. And then before that, I was at Etsy in New York City for a little bit over 5 years.
Wow.
So startup is more sort of like my realm. In terms of subscription, it's interesting. So I'm the CFO at Envoy. And when I left my last company, my company Quid merged with another company called NetBase. And as I was looking for my next adventure, I was kind of looking for a company that had two components in terms of the business mechanics. One was enough virality that sort of like customers found you. And the other one was the ability to bolt on a sales team so that you can actually go out and put go-to-market plans and strategies to grow the business. And part of the reason why I was looking for that was particularly because when I was at Etsy and Indiegogo, it was more of a viral play. So those were not subscriptions per se. We had very high retention, but it was not subscription, but it was viral. Like the internet made it happen, kind of. When I got to Quid, we really had to build an enterprise sales team, and that was a subscription play. And that was a little bit different. So as I was looking for my next venture, I was looking for something that had a combination of those two things, which I think is a great way to grow a business. So that's how I ended up at Envoy.
Awesome. That's quite a career. Being in startups is, of course, very exciting, and you're in the perfect place for it, right out there in the Bay Area. So did you set out to be a serial entrepreneur, or did you find yourself just working with startup organizations?
No, I've seen a little bit of everything now in startups. I was at a startup that ran out of money. I was at a startup that went to an IPO. I was at a startup that was acquired. So I've kind of seen a little bit of everything. The way that I got to what I consider sort of like my launch pad, if you will, of startups at Etsy, I was working at Citigroups in the global transactions division, and I hated the job. It's no knock on Citi. It's a great company. People really love it. It's a great brand, whatever. But I didn't feel like I was a part of the end result, right? We were basically reporting other things that happened outside of our control for the most part. And when I was leaving Citi, the SVP that I reported to at the time happened to have gone to high school with the COO of Etsy at the time. And he just said, "Hey, I think you'll enjoy working with this woman. She's brilliant. Her name is Beth Ferreira." And you know what? I went and I visited the place, and I thought it was straight crazy. I was like, these people have shorts and flip-flops and tattoos, and I'm coming in with my suit and tie. But what I did notice was that they all were passionate. They worked. It was a different sort of. This sounds kind of soppy, but it was just a different look in their eye. Like they were working on something that they thought was meaningful and important, and I was hooked from that moment, because I was like, I don't get this vibe at Citi. At Citi, everybody's like, you're just working, right? Here, people are like enjoying it. So then that's how I decided to startups, and after that, I've been hooked ever since.
Awesome. Well, you touched on it a little bit in your intro, working in subscription in different ways throughout your career. Talk to us a little bit about what you've learned about the complexities of subscription. And I think looking at it from the transactional perspective too, of some other organizations that you did, what are some key differences there that you see that maybe people who haven't been in subscription before don't know or can't appreciate?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of different things. For instance, the company where I was at before Envoy, I quit. It was a subscription play, but it was very large contracts.
Okay.
So we had $1 million contracts. We, like our average order size was, I think 65K to start kind of thing. And so it was, pretty much premier software. Sales cycles were much longer. So how you devise a plan of attack there when you're dealing with the enterprise is a bit different. Even on the marketing side, you're not going to get a lot of just cookie cutter SEMs. You're going to go buy Google AdWords and everybody's going to find your stuff. This was something that required a consultative sale motion. So building that sales business and building that team is a very different motion than a motion that has sort of the components that I have now at Envoy, where a lot of people are exposed to the software, a lot of people interact with it, people see it every day, and the use case, it's way more straightforward, if you will. People can get their head around, I want to do that. So how we've built those two organizations has varied, vastly.
Sure. So talk to us a little bit about Envoy. What do your acquisition channels look like? Are you exclusively on the web? How are you acquiring customers today?
Yeah, so Envoy, so we have, obviously the pandemic has hurt the one part of it, which is sort of like our viral component. A lot of people are exposed. We have some of the biggest logos in the world using us, and some of the most tech forward leaning companies in the world using our products. A lot of it is exposure. People go, they sign into a place, they're like, hey, this looks sleek, this is amazing, I want to put that in my shop. So that's one of the channels, and we have sort of that viral loop, and we have a self-serve motion that, where people can just come in, sign up, go for a trial without any interaction with a salesperson. We obviously also use, paid media. So, and the normal channels that you would think, obviously LinkedIn, Google, some Facebook, although Facebook not as much for our specific product, because it's not a consumer play. And then we have outbound. We have an outbound team. So we have an outbound team for BDRs and our sales reps. So it's pretty much that. Also, though, we do have a channel team that works with partners.
Gotcha. How you've touched on a little bit, but how has the pandemic impacted these channels? What are you seeing as being effective? Have any, some merchants have said they've seen explosion in certain channels or certain products, and then others, of course, have waned because of it. What have you guys seen?
Yeah, so I don't know if you followed like what we've done, but we were very quick at developing products that matched the consumer needs in the pandemic. So pretty quickly after the pandemic hit, we launched, what we call our Protect product, which is a way for folks to get back into the office. If you think about the history of the company of what we normally serve, our product was mostly about visitors coming into your office, checking in, deliveries being delivered to your office. But when the pandemic hit, obviously people were not visiting offices. And the fact that people were not in offices, deliveries was still very important, but not as much needed. What people did need was a way to safely get back into the office. So what we did was we launched a product that allowed companies to manage the inflow of people into their office, pre-register them, and sort of like give them an assignment that they can't come into the office. What we saw was that although our normal channels for our visitors was not as strong, there was a very high demand for companies that were trying to get back to work safely. And that really catapulted us and really moved, really helped, particularly in the middle part of the year when the pandemic was really getting off. And from there, what we did was we shifted the strategy a bit. We did a bit more about webinars. So again, thankfully, we have some pretty big logos as our customer base. So we have webinars where we were able to put some pretty big brands to talk about how to return to the office safely. And that yielded a lot of results, whereas before we weren't doing that as much.
Wow, that is so interesting. And what a pivot in a very short period of time. What was that like? I mean, first to identify that there was this opportunity, then you got to develop that product, put it out into market. I mean, what was that like?
It's interesting because the pandemic has really pushed our speed of product development and go to market to a point where before we weren't seeing as a company, and I don't think a lot of companies have seen. For us, quite frankly, if we go back to the beginning of the pandemic, and I just joined in January, so I joined right before the apocalypse. The beginning of the pandemic, quite frankly, we didn't know what was going to happen. Like many other companies, we did not understand, like, okay, what does this actually mean? How long is this going to go for? And again, to be transparent, that was a bit of like, hey, this might be a little bit of, choppy waters for us in trouble, because we're an office company, right? We do workplace technology.
Mm-hmm.
We quickly found out, though, that the economy needs to continue. People need to continue to go to offices, and thankfully, our founder Larry is a technologist, and he's always been pushing us to think about the platform and the platform offering. So we were one of the few companies that had like a mobile offering, and we had all of these other components, and we said, hey, why don't we leverage the mobile components that we have to be able to facilitate people's return to the office, because we saw the need ourselves. Like, some people wanted to go back to the office, but we were like, is it safe?
Right.
So it was pretty frantic. Our marketing team did a phenomenal job of lining up, whether it was press, and like I said, the webinars in very quick fashion. So I think it was a big push, but again, it was sort of, we went from like fear to like joy really quick,
Mm-hmm.
if you will.
Yeah. So, and I'm very interested to hear this answer, considering you've been involved in so many startups. But one of the things I think our listeners are interested in is taking a subscription business from point A through growth to B and to C and beyond. So can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you've seen, maybe some of the ones you've consistently seen across multiple businesses, whether that's around technology, billing, acquisition, marketing, just hit on some of those, and kind of what are some of lessons learned along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that, proof of concepts do not mean product market fit, right? I think a lot of times, just because you might get one or two, even sizable contracts, some people jump the gun and say, we found, the product market fit. And what I found, particularly in my previous companies, is some companies have a lot of money to experiment, and they'll throw $100,000 at you just to figure out if they want to use you. But you have to be careful to think that you can build a full business around it, that you're going to go ahead and like build a full enterprise team around that, because you can be getting way ahead of your skis.
Sure.
Right? So proof of concepts, and honestly, managing board expectation, and in many cases CEO expectations. People they get giddy, right? It's like, hey, we found it. This is the future.
Sure.
And I saw that happen a few times where, we had early success, but then actually scaling that beyond those early adopters was, challenging. I do think that the whole thing around crossing the chasm is something that people should really be focused on. I know it's an abused book or term in some marketing circles, and if you're getting your MBA, you probably got, it's like default reading. But there is something about that early adopter. There is something about that sales cycle that you should be aware of. Like, who are the decision makers, and how much advocacy, do you need? I've been in situations where the right advocate could be $1 million deal, literally $1 million deal, but that's a unicorn. Finding that advocate, that forward-thinking technologist, that person that has the budget and, quite frankly, the risk tolerance to do it. That's not a guarantee that you're going to find those advocates everywhere. So I'd say you got to pace yourself, particularly in early development. The other thing I think, and this, while I was at Etsy, I wore a lot of hats, including running marketing. So I ran finance, I ran data, but I ran marketing for a little while. And part of the reason why I ran marketing for a little while was because I understood early on that what I used to call the social multiplier was going to run out, and we needed to understand marketing in order to grow the business. A lot of times you're in technology leaning companies with technology CEOs, and they don't believe in marketing. They think that their product is the most amazing thing in the world, and that's going to sell on its own. And you don't spend that time to really understand the channels. You don't spend that time to really do the experiment you're going to need to be able to scale later.
Sure. So do you think that that innovation, that scaling, that reinvestment in your product, there's this you've always got your internal roadmap, right? What you want to do, and where you think the product needs to go. How do you balance that with what the client is asking for, what the market is asking for? How do you balance between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a challenge that every company faces, particularly a company like ours now where we're innovating, right? Because innovation, a lot of people don't see it, sort of coming. You kind of have to, walk them through it. I've been in places where we have completely put all of our resources to the new shiny thing and then launched it, and then it fell flat. And at that same time, we were neglecting our cash cow, right? The tried and true. I think it's a balance. Data is important. Understanding where you're going to need to lean in on the customer management side, right? If you have a big customer and there's a big thing on the roadmap that they're not going to get, you at least have to acknowledge that and make sure that there's proper stakeholder management for those big customers, because you do need to innovate. At our company now, it's a bit more. I'd say it's a bit more intricate than this, because the product team and engineering think about it, and our go-to-market teams. But we just split our resources and we said we're going to spend X% on this, X% on this, and X% on that. And then afterwards, we just do some compromising and bartering, if you will. Sure. But there has to be a philosophy that usually comes from the top, quite frankly, as to how you're going to split that, bandwidth up.
Right. Let's turn for a second to post-acquisition. Talk about, once you've got that customer, how do you keep them? We operate here a back-end subscription management system, right? So we're very focused on it's come in the top of the funnel. How do you keep that customer? How do you build that customer? How do you keep them from canceling and properly communicate and engage with them? So what strategies are you guys putting into place to keep those hard-earned customers?
Yeah, so the first thing is laser focus on customers and on renewals. And I know that sounds like who isn't doing that, but a lot of people aren't actually doing that.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's kind of interesting. We meet weekly, and that includes the CEO, the CRO, myself, and our renewal team. And we go over basically, we have a weekly meeting and we have a monthly meeting to review the month. And then we have a quarterly meeting to review the quarter. And it is a laser focus on how far out can we look at the customers and what is the customer's health right now, and what do we need to do to engage, all the way up to doing things like, do we send our product folks to talk about the product roadmap with our important customers? Like, do we have CEO intervention? What actually is happening? What can we provide? Do we have the proper metrics? So for us, making sure that we have a clear forecasting model as to how we think things are going to go, and then continue to iterate it every single quarter. We'd be like, okay, we thought this was going to happen. This is what's going to happen. In my previous company, we had something what we call high value actions. So identifying within your product, what are the high value actions that you can see correlate with renewal and retention, in terms of how are they using your product, whether it's a sequence, a time period, or specific features that they're using. And we kept track of that to make sure that we were encouraging, folks to understand the use of the software to be able to utilize that, because we found that some of the complaints or, frustrations our customers had were things that we had already solved, but we just weren't doing a good job of surfacing that further. So we do a lot of that tracking. So I think tracking is really the key, and active participation up to the CEO on your customers is required.
That's really interesting. So I've been in subscription long enough to have been in it at a time when subscription was a bit more of a set it and forget it concept, right? You wanted to get the customer in the door, and then you wanted to keep them as long as you could. But there was almost a knee-jerk reaction to waking the dead and over communicating with customers, or reminding them too much about the product that they're paying for. And it seems like in recent years, namely due to technology, that's been completely turned on its head, right? Now it's all about engagement, demonstrating value to the customer constantly, because they've got so much choice. They're involved in so many subscriptions and they're easy to cancel now, as they should be. But what you just hit on speaks a lot to data, right? And having ability and access and visibility into data. How do you guys manage through that? How do you get access to that data? And I assume it is the lifeblood of your business, but it's got to be a focus around it, right?
Yeah, so I run the data team here, and I've run the data team in every company from Etsy onward. So data is critical for you to understand what your customers are doing, but also understanding what's the right data to look at, right? Because there is an abundance of data now, right. And there are people that think that just the preponderance of the data means you're doing something, right?
Right.
So I think the critical thing with data is just identifying what you have to focus on, but as importantly, what you don't have to focus on. Making sure that there is data integrity up and down the chain, particularly for subscription businesses. Like your ARR waterfall, like it needs to tie 18 different ways. Like you need to understand contractions, you need to understand, upsells, you need to understand full churn. You cannot mess with that. And it's interesting because we've actually looked at other companies as part, as ongoing operation, we're always looking at potential acquisitions and whatnot. And I'm always surprisised by, to your point, some people just have some of this stuff on a spreadsheet and they just put it there and they're like, this is when the renewal is up. And it literally is amazing. No, you have to make sure that there's good data integrity, that you're making the investments, that Salesforce or whatever CRM you're using is pretty clean, pretty tight, and that all of your dashboards are pretty clean. I think it's critical for the data to be clean.
Yeah, absolutely. Another balance question here between the desire as a startup, right, to move quickly, innovate quickly, learn from what's working, what's not, and kind of make that happen. How do you balance that against build versus buy decisions? So when it comes to your marketing engine, your billing systems, your financial systems, whatever the case might be, how do you evaluate what are the right things to build versus the ones that, hey, somebody's already gone down this road before, this is a good partner for us?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it really depends on the CEO, and it really depends on the technology team. Some technology teams are just build technology teams. My personal philosophy is we are the SaaS business because we have a hypothesis that we can build something better than other people that they can leverage, and therefore I apply that same hypothesis when it's things that we are not building ourselves, right? So if it's not in our core, my thought process is you shouldn't build it. If it's not in your core. Now, there are things that are difficult to find out of the box that fit your business.
Yep.
But I would say that by and large, you have to be, implementation is key. So long as you commit to really investing in the implementation, I think a lot of solutions would yield better results. I think where there's less results and worse outcomes is when people just think that things work out the box. There's no such thing as out the box solutions, even in SaaS.
Right. Funny you say that. That is the entire philosophy around, our solution is that there's a lot of SaaS providers out there that are really good at what they do. And for, the ultra small startups, that makes a lot of sense. As you go up the chain though, you're growing complexity of products, offers, markets, all these kind of things. Your business becomes complex, as do your business rules. And the ability of some SaaS platforms to accommodate that becomes more difficult for them, right? They're trying to solve for the masses. So we've tried to architect ours a little bit differently using cloud technologies, but deploying everything custom, but in a very reusable way. So I like that. I like that approach, right? If it's not your core, if it's not core to your product, to what you're putting out there into the market, it's a good thing to evaluate outsourcing.
Oh yeah, and I mean you have limited resources, right? If you're going to be building out your own, billing system or competitor to Salesforce, I think there's a scale for everything. I think that scale though is much larger than I'd say the vast majority of companies, and you should really be working on your customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you seen any differences in consumer behavior, I should say customer behavior, those that you have acquired in terms of like how they're dealing with COVID? Are you seeing an impact on renewals and people's ability to renew because maybe they're experiencing some financial hardships? Are you seeing an uptick in maybe chargebacks, for credit card processing? Any material differences there over the past year?
Yeah, I mean, clearly we've seen an impact in our SMB segment because there are a lot of SMBs that are struggling in this economy.
Sure.
So we've seen SMB, but for us, because it's interesting. I think that our product has evolved from a nice to have, like from a cool thing, like, oh my God, you have an iPad in front of your building, to a nice to have, to a must have now, because people need to understand who is going into their workspaces and not. They need to manage space, right? They need to do all of these things now more than ever. So even the SMBs, they're basically, we have something where people are pausing their accounts because they're like, hey, I want to pause my subscription until we get back.
Sure.
Right. Yep. And it's because they know they're going to need a solution later. They don't want to get into a negotiation, thing. So they're doing that. But we've seen that we haven't seen anything in terms of chargebacks, to be honest. Let me knock on wood here. So chargebacks has not been an issue, and we do have a number of customers on credit card, but that hasn't been an issue. The impact has really been on the SMB. At the larger organizations, everyone is sort of preparing for the return. So, we've actually landed some of our biggest deals during COVID. And it's because people know the economy has to continue to get back to work. It needs to happen. So, but SMB has suffered.
What I took away from what you just said was how you evolved from the cool, nice to have thing to the must have thing. What a great place to have gone to, right? I guess positive outlook or impact from COVID there, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because we're in a pandemic and it's a terrible thing that's happening in the world, but in some ways it's been great for our company and our product. So that's an interesting thing to say, but it really has. We've evolved. Look, as I said, we launched Protect. We just launched desks because now companies are going back and they are going back at, let's say, 20% capacity, right? So guess what? You have to identify, what does 20% capacity mean?
Sure. Yeah.
And facilities managers and security people, they're like, okay, people cannot sit closer than 6 feet. So now you have to identify, even if you come into the office, where are you going to sit? So we've launched all of these products, and even post COVID and full vaccination, there's going to be a new normal. It's not going to be all the way to the right or all the way to the left in terms of whether people are going to go fully remote versus back to the office. There's going to be somewhere in between, and companies are going to be different. Mm-hmm. We're going to be able to provide that flexibility for managing your space, which now for like CFOs and HR people, it's just way more complex.
Wow. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. A lot of great insights, Sinohe. I can't appreciate you sharing all of this with us, with our listeners. I hope they got a lot out of it. Where can they go to, get in contact with you or learn more about the company?
Yeah. So if anyone has, questions for me, find me on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find, Sinohe Terrero, Sinohe Terrero. And in terms of finding our company, we're envoy.com. Right now if you have a company that is returning to the office or looking for really forward-thinking technology in terms of workplace technology around your entire space, whether it's the desk allocation, your visitors coming in, we have a ton of integrations with door access, Wi-Fi providers, as well as protect your folks coming back and deliveries. Find us at envoy.com. We'd love to help companies return to work because we need the economy back at work, and we're happy to be part of that core of companies that are enabling the return to work.
Helping companies get back to work. I love it. I know I'll definitely be checking out the website. Well, once again, Sinohe, thanks so much for the time today. Appreciate all the valuable information, and I trust everyone enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.